Hi students, and welcome to another week in kind of Corona mode. Some of you are in school, some of you are at home. So I prepare a video so that everyone can participate in the exercises and in the lessons, and I hope it will work out fine. This is the third part of our security exercises. We want to learn how we can protect our ASP.NET Core web APIs using modern authentication protocols like OAuth, OpenID Connect, Azure Active Directory, and things like that. In the last 2 weeks, you have learned, let's quickly recap, how to build an Angular application where we added a login button that uses our school's Azure Active Directory. We used the OpenID Connect protocol for signing in for authentication. Next, I've showed you how you can get access tokens for the Microsoft provided Graph API. Can you remember? The Graph API was the API with which you can get information about, for instance, your current user account, other users in the Azure Active Directory, but you have seen that you can also access all the different features of Office 365, like your calendar, your email inbox, and things like that. That was the front-end part. Afterwards, mainly last week, we focused on the backend. So we built a small API, a small ASP.NET Core 5 web API, and we added the Microsoft Identity Platform. With the Microsoft Identity Platform, we made sure that incoming access tokens are checked appropriately and that only signed in users can send requests to our API. Now this week, the video will be much shorter than the videos of last week and the week before. We have covered many areas, most areas that I wanted to work through with you. I only have a few details that I would like to share with you, and I would like to show you a very important aspect. I would like to show you how you can test your ASP.NET Core Web API, which is protected by Azure Active Directory, using Postman. You know Postman, the tool with which you can test web APIs. I would like to show you how you can get access tokens there, what you have to configure so that it is a little bit easier if you build your own APIs and you haven't created the UI yet. You can still test your APIs, although you need access tokens. So this will be the topic of this video. A few more details about our ASP.NET authentication stuff and Postman. Afterwards, the rest of the lesson for this week and probably also parts of next week will be exercise. Yes, I have prepared a homework, or let's say an exercise that you can work on. For those students who are currently in school, you can use the time with me together in class to start working on this project. If you have any problems, I will help you overcome these problems. Probably you will not be able to finish the entire exercise. So you can do the rest at home and next week in our next week's lesson. For those students who are at home this week, start with the exercise. If you have some problems, next week we will see us in person and I can help you overcome any problems. So the overall goal is that at the end of next week, everybody has watched all videos, understood the entire theory, and practiced all topics in the homework that you will get today. This is our plan, and with that, I think we should get started. Let me make my image here a little bit smaller so that we have more space for the code. Today we will just stay in ASP.NET Core, no Angular today. So this is the application that I created with you last week in my video. I have updated Visual Studio, so maybe some features are new. I'm on the latest version of the preview, but essentially it's exactly the code that you have seen last time. Let me quickly recap, just to make sure that everybody can remember what we did. We created a trivial API which just returns order 1 and order 2, but the important thing here is the authorize attribute. Let me zoom in so you see better. This one, the authorize attribute. By providing the authorize attribute, unauthorized, so users who are not signed in, they are called unauthorized users, cannot access this API. So if you try to access API/orders, you will not get any result. If you specify an access token, this access token is checked. Why is it checked? Because in the startup code, we registered here in dependency injection our Microsoft Identity Authentication. And secondly, we added authentication and authorization down here. And with these two things, the access tokens which come in are automatically verified. Verified against what? How does the Microsoft Identity Platform know, for instance, the client ID and things like that? Well, this one is, as you can see it here, part of the configuration. So here in app settings, you have the 3 important settings that are really important. Well, to be more specific, 4 settings. The first one is trivial. It's just login.microsoftonline.com because this is the URL where Azure Active Directory listens for login requests. Then we had the client ID. Can you remember what the client ID was? It was the application identifier of our API app registration. We will need the Azure portal in a second, and I will refresh your mind when we come in there. The third setting, is the tenant ID. This should be identical for everybody of you. It's our school's Azure Active Directory tenant ID. And last but not least, we specified here the audience. The audience is the API unique universal resource identifier, also something that we just copied from the Azure portal. So all 3 settings were just copied from the portal. Let me quickly show you, just to make sure that everybody understands what I mean. Here is the Azure portal, as you can see it here. And let me quickly check so that we have the correct one. Oh no, this is the wrong one. This is the right one. So let me draw a little bit. Here you see the client ID. This one is the client ID. 75C looks good. This one is the directory ID. You see this directory ID here? Oh, the arrow didn't draw correctly. This one is the directory ID 91F. 91F looks good. Now where comes the audience from? It was from the Expose an API tab. Here, I shouldn't zoom in. Let's do it like that. Here you see the URI 75C. So these are the settings that we have here. And down here we have the 2 permissions that we discussed last week. It was read and write. That looks good. That looks promising. So let's quickly try to call this method. Let's first run the API, of course. It will bring up our executable. Looks good. It listens on HTTPS localhost 5001 and HTTP localhost 5000. And with that, we go to Postman. Here I've prepared Postman. And first, let me quickly clear the cookies and get rid of that authentication here. So let's here do no auth. We will come to that in a second. If I try to send this one now, I will get an error. At least I should. Yes, here it is. You see, 401 unauthorized, because this API is not accessible without an access token. Now, last time we created an Angular UI in order to try and call our API. But today I would like to show you how we can do exactly the same, including authorization and authentication using Postman. Because in many situations, I mentioned it already, it's super useful to try the API, to be able to try the API, because maybe the UI hasn't been written yet, or maybe somebody else is responsible for the UI, and you as the API developer would like to make sure that your API works properly. So let me show you how that works. We go to authorization, and as you can see here, there are a bunch of options that you have concerning authorization. And for modern authorization, I mentioned it already, we use OAuth 2 or OpenID Connect. So please choose OAuth 2. Now we have to fill in a form with various parameters. You see these parameters here. They look a little bit complicated, but if you know what they do and what they are not that complicated. Let's scroll down a little bit. We can ignore the token name. That doesn't matter. The grant type is the one that we mentioned last time. Let me show you in the Azure portal that we had last week here. When we created our client app here, our client app, and we go to authorization. I already tried something here. I'm sorry for that. Let me quickly delete that one and take that client here. That is better. Good, here we are. Then last week, as you can see, we had the authorization code flow with PKCE. And exactly that one. We need that one here in Postman 2. Authorization code with PKCE. You have a separate networking course where you can ask your teacher for details about the authorization code with PKCE and all the different token type and so on. Here in the programming course, you have to just trust me. This is a good protocol. It's modern, it works fine, it's secure, so this is what we want to use. Now the next one, the callback URI for Postman, I just looked it up in the documentation. Don't worry, I will write this configuration down in the description of the YouTube video. So please go to the description of the YouTube video and you can copy this setting from there. The same will be true for the auth URL and the token URL. If you take a close look, you will see good old friends, login.microsoftonline.com, we already know that one. And here we see the tenant ID of our school, 91FC. This is the tenant ID of our school, and the rest is pretty straightforward. OAuth 2, name of the protocol, v2.0, version 2.0, and authorize for the auth URI, and for the token URI, exactly the same, but at the end, token. Again, I will copy both values in the description of the YouTube video, so please copy it from there. Now the client ID here, the D68B, if we take a look here, this is this one here, our good old friend, the client ID. So please copy your client ID into that field here. We don't need a client secret, we don't need that one. We can leave the code challenge method as it is. We don't need a code verifier. We can leave that one as it is. The scope here is the scope, the permission for which we would like to have a token. Can you still remember from last week about permissions and scopes? Let me quickly remind you, last week when we created the demo API, I told you that here under expose an API, you can define scopes, also known as permissions here. And here we define that our demo API should have two possible permissions, write and read. So please go into your Azure portal. Then navigate to your API in this case. Go to expose an API and copy, for instance, the read permission. And that one you paste in here. This one is the read permission. Now it looks like as that we could just click here and say get new access token. But it will not work. We don't have to try it. It would break. Why would it break? Well, in our case, we use Postman, and Postman is a desktop application here. It's not a single page application. Postman is a desktop application, and therefore, if we want to try Postman, we have to register another client for our client API. Let me show you what I mean. Please go to your client app registration in the portal, not the API, the client registration. Let me remind you here under Authentication, we have created a registration for a single page app. That is perfectly fine for Angular, for React, things like that. But Postman, our test client, is a desktop application. And therefore, if we want to try the API, we have to allow Postman to use this client registration. So we add a platform, an additional one, and we choose desktop application. You see it here, desktop application. And here we specify exactly the same redirect URI that we have specified here. I promised you that I put that one here in the video description. I will. So copy this value from there, go to your Azure portal and paste it in here, configure it. And now we have, as you can see it here, our single page app. This one is for our Angular client. And secondly, we have our desktop app, in particular this one, and this is for our Postman, because Postman is a desktop application. That looks good. If you have done that one, we can give it a try. So scroll down and click on Get New Access Token. Click on it. It will open a new browser window and I will type in my credentials. Let me move that to my second screen here. Let's type in the username. This is your HTL username that you know from our school. Click on Next. It will ask us for the password. Maybe you have registered multi-factor authentication. I haven't, because this is just a demo account, nothing special. Sign in. And then, crossing fingers, collecting token. You see a green check. This is exactly what I wanted to see. Now, Postman has retrieved an access token. This is, I didn't mention that last time, this is a so-called JWT, or also known as JOT token. You will cover JOT tokens in your networking course. So ask your teacher there. He will tell you much more about the structure of this token. For now, it's just gibberish, something, some letters and digits. We don't care. We want to use this token. Now Postman has a token. Hooray! So now it should be possible to call our API. Let me quickly check whether my API is still running. Yes, it is still running. That looks good. So I can click on Send. And let's see what's going to happen. Hoo-hoo! Before, we got 401. We got an error. But now, our request got through and we get back order 1 and order 2. Mission accomplished. Check. Now we can try that, or we can test that a little bit more in more details inside of our Visual Studio. Go to Visual Studio here, open the API endpoint and set a breakpoint here. Here it is. Oh, what is that? This is an old breakpoint. Add the breakpoint here. Go to Postman again and send it. Let's see. Yeah, we are here. So now the authorize attribute made sure that this is only possible because Postman sent us a valid JOT token, a JWT token, a JSON web token. Now the question is, what can we get from this token? And now it becomes really interesting. Last time I already showed you that inside of a property which is called HTTP context, we have something which is called user. We can have that even simpler. We can just say user. User is a so-called claims principal. That's the technical term for it. And we can check all the different claims of the token of our user. And here you see all these claims. What do we see here? First, we have some naming information like surname, given name, or even here the entire display name. This is essentially the email address here of my school demo account. We also get some information like the tenant ID. Here you can see we get the scope, read and write, and many other things like the name and the IP address. We can take a look at all of these things. Now, what can we do with that? Why is that so interesting? Now, let me show you why this is super interesting. I will stop the API here and write only one line of code. We can, inside of our API, access all these claims. How do we do that? We just say, for instance, let's print it, okay? Debug dot write line. Let's do something like this. The username is, And then we can access the claims and say user. This is the property that I've shown you before. Dot claims. And these claims, they are, if you take a look, they are an IEnumerable of system security claims claim. IEnumerable, can you remember that one? We covered that in the first semester. Please, in your mind, travel back in the first semester. We had this link thing. Language integrated query. Can you remember where and first and order by and all these things? Because this is a collection, an IEnumerable, we can apply that here. So what we can do with that, we can say dot first and say claim dot type equals. Now what should we enter here? What should be the claim type? I would like to show you that one. Let's close the bracket and then the errors should go away. Oh, sorry. Now I messed up. Now it looks much better. Now it looks better. Now what should we type in here? Let me show you that again. I will run the debugger. Please take a look at my screen. You don't need to do that on your own. Just take a look at my screen, okay? I go back to my Postman. Where is my Postman? Here is my Postman. Send it again. So the breakpoint will be hit. Here we are in the breakpoint. Oh, we got an exception. Oh, that doesn't matter because I just wanted to show you that one. Here are the results here. And if you take a close look, you will see that every single claim has some type here. You see, the type sometimes is very short. It's just name or IP address. And for some things, the type is rather long. You see that one? Object identifier. Or here, for instance, name. And before we have some URI. It's called a Universal Resource Identifier. It's just a string identifying the property. Now, for instance, we could try to find out the name property. How do we do that? Well, I just double click here and I copy all these things. You don't need to do that because I will delete that code in a second. Just take a look. I copy this one, break here, and paste it in here. That's a pretty long string, magic string that we have to remember. Very inconvenient, so give me a sec. We will get rid of that in a second. But first, let me show you that this really works. So, the username is, at the end, I think I have to say .value, right? Yes, .value. And now let's run it again. Let's go into Postman, run it again. The breakpoint will be hit. Here it is. And if we take a look at the output window, here is the output window, then we see, woohoo, the username is, and we see our username. And that's a really cool thing because now inside of our orders controller, we can always find out all the claims of our user. Things like the user ID, the username, the first name, the last name, the IP address. And of course, based on this information, we can do some authorization. We can say, oh, is this user allowed to access this or that? Or you can simply store the information, what you will use in the homework. Now, I promised you, let me run that through so you see that it really works. And here it is. And in Postman, we see the result. It's good. Now, I promised you that we can get rid of this long type. Yes, we can. There are enumerations that you can use to find out or to replace these magic strings. There are two enumerations which are important. Claim types is the first one. Claim types contains some very generic information. For instance, the name identifier, and guess what? I said enumerations, they are constants. I said something wrong here. But you see, this is exactly that long magic string. You don't need to remember it. All you need to remember is that there are constants in claim types. So just select name identifier, and that's exactly the same as we had before. Now we will again see the username. These claim types are generic claims. Claims which are not only used by Microsoft, but which follow a certain standard. Nearly everybody provides them. Google provides them, GitHub provides them, and so on. But there is a second category of very, let's say, Azure Active Directory specific claims, and there is a second set of constants which are relevant there. So copy this line. Now, by the way, now you can follow along. So please type in this first line. If you need to pause the video, do that. And in the second line, we say the user's object ID is, and here we want to access something which is very specific for Azure Active Directory, because Azure Active Directory identifies each user with a unique ID, with a GUID, a primary key. But this is not a claim which is standardized. Maybe Google does it completely differently. And for those things, you shouldn't use claim types, but you use claim constants, which comes from Microsoft Identity.web. And here you see, for instance, the object ID. And if we hover over the object ID, you will see that this is, whoops, sorry, I was too fast here. You will see that this is something which is Microsoft specific and comes specific with Azure Active Directory. So this should be an identifier which you can use to identify the user object. Please type in this code, pause the video if necessary, and then we will try it again. I run the API. Come on, API, come up. Oh, something is wrong. Maybe I haven't closed the API before. I'm sorry. I didn't stop it. Okay, let's restart it. Yes, looks much better. Go back to Postman, send it here. Let's take a look at the output window. Here it is. And as you can see here, oh, I wanted to have the username. I used a wrong one. I used the name identifier. You see that one? Oh, I'm sorry. Of course, I wanted to take the name here. I'm sorry. So again, back to the start. Let's rerun it. Let's go back to Postman. Where is Postman? Here is Postman. Run it again. And now it should work. I'm sorry. Not name identifier, but name. Here we are. And you see, now we have the username. Woohoo! And we see the user ID from Azure Active Directory. So why is this object ID so important? Well, the username might change over time. Imagine that I marry somebody. I am already married, but if I wouldn't be married and I marry tomorrow, I could take the name of my wife, and therefore my email address would change, my name would change. So you should never use names as a permanent reference to a user. You should always use IDs, like for instance the Azure Active Directory ID here. And 79E is a good ID because it's the user inside of Azure Active Directory, okay? There are other even better IDs like UPNs and things like that, but I will not go into details. For this simple course, this user's object ID is a very good way of identifying a user, for instance, to store a reference to the AAD user inside of Azure Active Directory. Okay? So this is the ID. claimtypes.name and claimconstants.objectID. So the next time that Rainer logs in, I could check, for instance, this object ID, and I could go into my database. Do I already know this user? And I can retrieve all the different data from this user. The rest is clear. If I run it, we get the result. Everything is fine. So now you understand how you can access the claims inside of your controllers. That is super useful for authorization. For instance, you could create a database table where you store which user is allowed to see orders from which country, for instance. And when you get in the object ID, you look it up in the database. Which country is this user responsible for? And add a link query where you restrict the results to the country that the user is responsible for. This is the link between Azure Active Directory and your applications database. This is important because you will need it during your homework. So please make sure that this runs, and I hope this small little demo here with Postman makes it easier for you to test and play with protected APIs directly from Postman. And that's it. That was the theory for today. There would be so much more things to talk about authorization and what ASP.NET Core is capable of, things like policies and so on. But this is a beginner's course and you are at the beginning of your ASP.NET Core career. So let's skip these things and get our hands dirty and do a little bit of exercising. So here the theory stops. The video is done. I will post the homework where you can practice all these things on our GitHub repository. For those who are watching this video who are not in my course, of course, I will link the homework or the exercise in GitHub in the description of this video. Feel free to do the exercise if you want. For today, I say thank you, and I'm looking forward for next week's lesson where we will cover new aspects of ASP.NET Core.